Hey everybody, my name's Lynn Hayes. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll be talking about the astrology for the week of January 11th, 2021. Before I start today's video though, I would like to talk a little bit about the intersection between astrology and politics. We are living through a time right now that is so charged politically, and I am a person, I have 3 planets in Libra. Libra tends to like to reach sort of a middle ground, see both sides, come to some sort of agreement. It's very tactical, diplomatic, wants to bring people together. So even though I have my own views, which are very strong, obviously, and I do tend to leak them out a little bit, I have always, in my blog and my writings and in these videos, I've always tried to very carefully walk a middle ground, not offend anybody, be careful with people's feelings that they didn't agree with me. And I think the situation right now is so intense and so charged that I don't really feel that I can do that anymore. There's going to be more of my own opinions and my own views leaking into my work. I always try not to let it affect the astrology. For example, if I do a profile of a person who maybe I don't like, I try to always keep the profile focused on the astrology and try to bring the positive as well as the negative. But when we're in a situation like we're in today, if I'm talking to you about the astrological influences, I have to be putting them into the current world that we live in. And I know that there are some astrologers who don't do that, who are more theoretical, but that is not my work. My work is to try to bring a level of understanding into your life in a way that it can work for you. So in order to do that, I think we have to have some idea of what's happening around us, because we really don't live in a vacuum. Thank you for your understanding as we go on through the next few months, which are probably going to be fairly intense, at least in the United States. However, back to the astrology. We do have quite a lot to talk about today. We have Jupiter, which is in Aquarius, in a square to Uranus this week. We have Uranus stationing direct. It's been retrograde. It's the last of the retrograde planets, and it's finally turning direct. For 2 weeks, we'll have no planets retrograde until Mercury turns retrograde on January 30th. Mercury will be retrograde for its usual 3 weeks, and then we don't have any retrogrades after that until Pluto turns retrograde on April 27th. So we'll be talking more about that, but the important thing to remember is that after Uranus turns direct on the 14th, we have no retrograde planets. In terms of world events, that means that things can progress much more quickly. Hopefully that will include some resolution of the current virus situation, perhaps effective and safe vaccines that are taken by quite a lot of people, hopefully not mandated. And under Saturn and Aquarius, we are likely to see more of a tendency towards social control, as well as the tendency to rebel against that control. And speaking of which, this week on January 17th, the square from Jupiter in Aquarius to Uranus is a very rebellious, radical aspect that can generate a lot of intense behavioral acting out, especially if these planets are hitting anybody's chart in a personal way. There's just one alignment of the square from Jupiter to Aquarius, but it's pretty powerful because Uranus is stationary in the sky right now. It's hardly moved from the same degree for at least a month, and it will continue to be stationary for another month or so. When a planet is stationary in the sky, we experience its influence more intensely. And Uranus, of course, is about breaking up the paradigms, breaking up the status quo, bringing in something new. And here we have Jupiter, the planet of expansion and optimism, that also can be somewhat arrogant. We can think that we're the gods and that we need to have our way because we're always right. And when Jupiter is in a square to Uranus, the radical revolutionary, it can get a little crazy. which it is. However, that said, there's also a positive aspect to this, of course. And in our personal life, that involves the recreation of a new way of living. You know, every week I get up here and I say, the old way is dying and the new is coming in. And, you know, that's just true. That's what's happening. And with the coronavirus, that's simply accelerating the process. We're going into a new age, the age of Aquarius, and things are changing. The square from Jupiter to Aquarius can bring in a lot of ideas. It can excite us with the new possibilities. And really, we can take advantage of it by looking more consciously into our life to see what are we holding on to that is obviously over. You know, what part of our life do we really need to let go of? Also this week, on Monday, January 11th, is a harmonious sextile from Jupiter to Chiron. Hopefully this harmonious soft alignment will help to ease the hard edges of the square from Jupiter to Uranus, which can be a little more extreme. Many people call Chiron the wounded healer. I like to think of Chiron as the soul healer. Its role is to foster emotional healing through the release of old patterns, and in doing so, it clears the way for us to have a deeper and more enlightened experience of our true selves. This aspect, even though it only lasts for a few days because the sextiles are not very strong, they're harmonious and supportive, but they don't linger the way the squares do and even the trines. But this gives us an excellent opportunity to expand our awareness at higher levels of understanding. It's a very good time for any spiritual or philosophical exploration. And then on January 13th, we have a new moon in Capricorn at exactly 12 o'clock a.m. The new moon in Capricorn is typically a time for building. Capricorn is the builder. It's about construction. It's about the structures that serve as the underpinning for our life, what we base our life on. It has to do with material success, mastery of the material world, setting goals, achievement. It also has a lot to do with our obligations and our responsibilities, the things that we have to do, the things that must be done. So when we have a new moon in Capricorn, it's a very good time to begin a new project, to begin a new goal, to begin a new pattern of action that will take us in a forward direction and help us to achieve what we want to achieve. This new moon is particularly strong because it's within a degree of Pluto. So the sun and the moon and Pluto are all tightly aligned within 1 degree. Pluto adds that layer of intensity and depth and focus, and the idea that we're deconstructing something before we can reconstruct a new reality. Pluto is all about tearing down the debris so that we can rebuild. You know, it's about creative destruction and transformation. And I would say that's a theme of this new moon. Now, the new moon falls at the peak of the station of Uranus, meaning it's exactly at a standstill, shining a laser beam, very powerful. And so there could be some surprises. And I think it's not going to help that Pluto is also in a challenging square to Eris at this time. Eris is a new planet. It has to do with discord. And there does seem to be a certain amount of randomness with the way that Eris works. I'll post a link in the description box to an article that I wrote about the square of Pluto to Eris. But in any case, that square is embedded in the chart of the new moon. So even though we're building, we're starting something new in Capricorn, we have Uranus stationary in the sky, waking us up to new possibilities. We have the square to Eris, which is throwing in some oddball situation that we weren't anticipating that will completely change the outcome of whatever we're doing. We have Mars in Taurus, where it's very stubborn, where it's said to be in its detriment, where it has difficulty getting moving, and then when it does, it tends to erupt in some kind of explosion. And Mars is in a square to Saturn, which is in Aquarius, of course. So this Mars squaring Saturn is a bit like driving with the brake on. There's a lot of drive, but then Saturn is saying, are you sure that's what you want to do? Maybe you should think about it. So there can be a lot of frustration that builds under the Mars square Saturn. And then at the same time, we have the square from Jupiter to Uranus that I already talked about, already radical, already reckless, already revolutionary. So this new moon has a tremendous amount of energy for change. We wouldn't normally say that with a Capricorn new moon. Capricorn is very grounded, very practical. You make a plan, you make it happen. That's it. Pretty simple. But with all of these other influences right now, and the reason I started out talking about politics is because what we saw last week, there's no doubt that it's chaotic. There's no doubt that there's discord there. There's no doubt that there's kind of an eruption of frustration that is building up to a crescendo. And we are not going to see that end until probably well after the inauguration. Really, with all these energies, there's a sense of something that's about to burst open. This can be kind of scary. It can be frightening. It might be hard, but it could also be beautiful. And I'm not talking about what happened in Washington, D.C., but just generally, when there's a change that's about to blossom and we're holding on and we're resisting and we really don't want to let that change happen, but it just builds up and it builds up. And then finally there's this explosion, there's a crescendo, and that's when the magic happens. And so there's a tremendous amount of potential for that during this new moon. Now, the energy of the new moon tends to begin building about 3 days before and last about 3 days after. But it's likely to have some energetic significance for all of us. And now let's talk about the week ahead. On Monday morning, January 11th, I'm laughing because this is like the 8th time that I've said this. On Monday morning, January 11th, the moon begins the day in Sagittarius, and then it moves into Capricorn around 8:30 in the morning Eastern time. When the moon moves into Capricorn, there's a shift into a more grounded kind of experience. However, on that same day, we have Mercury, which is in Aquarius, conjunct Jupiter, also in Aquarius. The Mercury-Jupiter conjunction is very good for anything having to do with the mind, but it's also moving into a square to Uranus in Taurus, which will culminate on the next day, on Tuesday, January 12th. So we have this expansive sense of ideas, intelligence, awareness, confidence with Mercury and Jupiter, but it's leading into this somewhat disturbing square to Uranus. Uranus, remember, is the awakener. It's very electrical in nature, and so when there's a challenging or a strong aspect from any planet to Uranus, it tends to shake us up a little bit. So even though we're very confident, we have lots of great ideas with Mercury, Jupiter, we also are likely to have a lack of focus, to be easily distracted because of the Uranus influence that culminates the next day. However, getting back to the Capricorn moon, it does form a nice trine in the middle of the day to Mars, which is in Taurus. And when the moon harmonizes with Mars, that's very good for our physical energy, our motivation. It helps to activate us. And that's very useful for Capricorn, which really needs that Mars energy to get things going. So this Moon-Mars alignment only lasts for a few hours, not very long, but it will help to energize us. And like I said, this is a very good day for thinking, for planning, for any kind of communication, information processing. But also be aware there's probably going to be a flood of new ideas that are coming in. Carry a notebook. This is a time when we can get downloads of information, of intuition. Then on Tuesday, January 12th, there aren't any other alignments except for the square from Mercury to Uranus that I talked about. So overall for these 2 days, the theme is going to be information, new ideas, lots of input, probably not a lot of sleep. Also on Tuesday, we have a challenging or a strong square from Venus in Capricorn to Chiron in Aries. Venus is the planet of our relationships, the way we relate to other people, the way that we connect. It has to do with our values. And Chiron, of course, has to do with wounding and healing. So when there's a challenging aspect between any very personal planet, Venus, Mars, Mercury, Moon, to Aries, it can bring up some emotional disturbance. Any unresolved wounds or heightened emotionality or sensitive places, these are activated under a challenging square to Chiron. So this is a time when we're likely to be a little bit more sensitive too. And because we have Mercury, the planet of communication, squaring Uranus, which can be disruptive, we might say some things that we're sorry for, and other people might also say some things that might hurt our feelings. So it's a good idea to just be aware of all of this on Tuesday, but that's a lot of planetary energy, and it's likely to be a very active day intellectually, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. A very busy day. Then on Wednesday, January 13th, we have the new moon just after midnight in the sign of Capricorn. I already talked all about the new moon, and I won't repeat it here, except to say watch out for that square from Mars to Saturn. Then later in the day, just before noon Eastern time, the moon is going to move into Aquarius. There's already so much Aquarian energy, I don't think you're even going to probably notice it. And as the moon moves through Aquarius that day, it's going to transit first Saturn and then Jupiter. When the moon transits Saturn, there's a couple of hours when we might feel somewhat repressed or isolated, perhaps a little bit of depression. But then when the moon transits Jupiter a few hours later, there's going to be a lift. Jupiter is very buoyant and very confident and optimistic. The new moon in Capricorn, frankly, can weigh us down a little bit. We can become very aware of our obligations, our responsibilities, the kind of solid things in life that some of us resist. But then the moon moves into Aquarius. It's much more intellectual. It's much more working on the mental plane. And then we have Venus in a harmonious trine to Uranus. So even though Venus is in Capricorn, where we tend to be very responsible, it's harmonizing with Uranus, which is inventive, which really craves new experiences. Venus has a lot to do with financial markets, money, and the things we value. And when there's a trine to Uranus, there's often surprises. There's often some kind of bubble that can happen. Then on Thursday, January 14th, we have Uranus turning direct. And remember, this is the last of the retrograde planets. Last summer, 5 to 7 planets retrograde for months and months and months. Every planet that could turn retrograde did turn retrograde. That's all over. It's quite possible that anything that you've been trying to pull off over the last year that you haven't been able to, there could suddenly be a lot of energy for these things to move forward as we go through the spring, especially. Also on January 14th, the sun is going to make its exact alignment with Pluto. When the sun is conjunct Pluto, especially in Capricorn, it gives us a tremendous focus. There's strength, there's intensity, there's empowerment with the sun conjunct Pluto. So that ought to help to bring a little more focus to this very Uranian day. Then on Friday, January 15th, there's literally nothing to talk about except that the moon goes into Pisces. While the moon is in Pisces and with no other planetary alignments to talk about, the moon has a chance to really shine. When the moon is in Pisces, it's a very creative time. It's very good for meditation. It's very good for seeking experiences that are going to help us to transcend our ordinary day-to-day reality, life in a body, all the little things that we have to do. Under the influence of Pisces, we crave magic. We crave something special and unique. The imagination takes over. So this would be a wonderful time to do something that's just really special. I always think about my neighbor. She likes to take the neighbor children into the woods and show them where there could be fairies living. That's exactly the kind of thing that we want to do on Friday, while the moon is in Pisces and there's no other interactions. When I say there's no other aspects, there are no other planetary aspects that day. However, we do have the larger planetary aspects, and I bring that up because on Sunday, January 17th, we have that square from Jupiter in Aquarius to Uranus in Taurus. And the influence of this alignment is building throughout the week. But then these lunar aspects help to define how the bigger aspects unfold. On Saturday, January 16th, the moon is still in Pisces. It starts to make aspects with other planets. It sextiles Mars, sextiles Uranus, and sextiles Venus. So a sextile, remember, it's a 60-degree aspect that's supportive, but there's some excitement there. There's a little more energy than with a trine, which is just supportive and calm and very peaceful and harmonious. The sextiles are exciting. They add a little bit of spark. So with the Pisces moon interacting with these earthy planets, it gives us an opportunity to bring some of that creative magic down to earth. So that can be a beautifully creative day. And that takes us to Sunday, January 17th. The first thing that happens that morning is the Pisces moon conjoins Neptune. Again, just more magic, more imagination. This happens very early in the morning Eastern time at 4:34 a.m. So you may not be awake for it, especially if you're on the west coast of the US. That can be a time of dreams and an opportunity to maybe have a little bit deeper of a dream experience. But we also have that exact aspect of Jupiter squaring Uranus on that day. And that can cause some of us to feel somewhat unsettled. If you're a person who tends towards anxiety, any kind of hard angle Uranus influence can be unsettling, can be a little energetically disruptive. So these few days with the moon in Pisces, I really recommend that you do things that will help to calm your nervous system and help you to get the most out of the electricity of Jupiter and Uranus and all of this Aquarian stuff that's happening. And that takes us to Monday when we'll have a new video. However, the moon is very active that day. It moves into Aries very early in the morning, Eastern time. And then it proceeds to form a sextile to Saturn, a square to Chiron, and then a sextile to Jupiter. That Aries moon needs a lot of action, needs a lot of fire. It can be very impulsive. So I just wanted to kind of drop that in case you watch the video a little later on Monday or maybe Tuesday or Wednesday so that you'll be prepared. And I think that's a good place to end this video. As always, I thank you so much for being here. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the description box and I'll see you next time.